I'd like to thank our three sponsors, Tingley Rubber, Honeywell, and Gorbel. Tingley Rubber, because you're tough and hardworking, we need to be too. We understand that you work hard in tough conditions. Your work is as demanding as it is important, and you deserve to be safe, comfortable, and protected in any environment. Mud, rain, chemicals, traffic, wind, darkness, the elements and hazards are no match for the durability, reliability, and protection that Tingley provides. Behind every Tingley product is more than 125 years of quality and excellence. Honeywell. Honeywell PPE manufactures a comprehensive range of workplace safety products and solutions with head-to-toe protective gear from hard hats, hearing protection, safety harnesses, respiratory and protective eye, hand, and footwear. Honeywell protects workers when they need it most. Gorbel. Are your people unprotected? OSHA requires fall protection for all workers at elevations of 4 feet or more. Gorbel has solutions to keep your workers safe. Go to www.gorbel.com today. Hi, I'm Maureen Paraventi, editor of Workplace Material Handling and Safety. This is another one of our thought leadership interviews. Now, today, I'm talking with Bob Lahey, President and CEO of the Construction Safety Council. As always, there's a lot to talk about when it comes to construction industry safety. So thanks for sitting down with me today, Bob.
Good afternoon. Glad to be here.
Now, let's start with the newest hazards first, of course, those stemming from the COVID-19 pandemic. OSHA recently issued an emergency standard for healthcare workers and then some additional guidance for other industries. Now, do you think the construction industry was helped by that additional guidance?
I do. Actually, June 10th was the most recent announcement by OSHA. Some long-awaited guidance that actually was expected earlier this year. But certainly the announcement that came out on June 10th, while it covered healthcare workers, OSHA also supplemented that with some additional information for all workers in the country. And they focused on those who are vaccinated and commented on unvaccinated workers as well. So I do think the guidance is helpful in the construction industry and in all industries, despite the fact that the construction industry has been pretty much ahead of the curve when it comes to the American workplace in terms of staying engaged, staying employed, and keeping safe every step of the way.
They didn't get to take a time out like a lot of other industries, did they?
They didn't. It certainly was a state-by-state decision. Our offices are located in Illinois. We have an audience that's national in scope, but in Illinois in particular, the construction industry, as it was in many states, was deemed essential. And so by that status of being an essential workforce, precautions were put into place relatively quickly, and those have been sustained throughout.
Well, what kind of changes were made to make sure that workers didn't contract or transmit the virus?
I think the most obvious two that I can cite are social distancing in the workplace on the job site. Now that's a change in pattern. That's a change in behavior. You have an industry that is proud of the fact that they work together and they work side by side, elbow to elbow, and are supportive and working next to each other. And so for them to engage in social distancing practices was not easy, but certainly is an adjustment that came early. The second one is really the masking, and we've all come to live with that reality in the last 12 months as well. So those two restrictions became heavily enforced and became very high level of awareness for those to stay in place in order to limit the spread of the virus during the past year now.
Now, how were the new policies communicated to the workers? Was there a lot of additional training required?
Training, but communication, right? Training, you communicate, you train, and you educate. And so through daily meetings, daily briefings on site, in advance of a job starting, while a job is ongoing. All of those are essential types of precautions and essential steps to make sure that the industry didn't fall into a phase or into a state where more extreme measures were required. And so far, so good.
That is a good point to make, though. By taking precautions, you can prevent some of the more extreme measures. Didn't even think of that.
Absolutely.
Now, let's switch gears a bit to an evergreen, unfortunately, an evergreen topic in the construction industry, fall protection. It's widely available. Manufacturers continue to improve their fall protection products, and yet falls remain the top cause of fatalities in the construction industry. Why the disconnect, and is there anything that can change it?
Yeah, falls continues to lead every annual list that OSHA puts out in terms of number of citations, and the most common threat to workplace safety in the construction industry is falls. Why the disconnect? It's partially a matter of you have a lot of people who work at heights in the construction industry, so certainly there's a greater likelihood for it to occur simply because it's a very frequent practice in a job site or even in a small workplace setting that involves a construction or a rebuild type of thing. So when we talk about falls, we don't necessarily have to envision 20 stories or 2 stories or 10 stories. These are injuries that are occurring at 4 feet and 6 feet and 8 feet of distance. And so a fall is anything from height. And yes, there's certainly more dramatic consequences from higher heights, but there can still be consequences that will limit a worker's ability to continue on the job, even if it's from a lesser height and it doesn't have the dramatic free fall that would typically come to mind. Could still result in ankles, knees, backs, elbows, shoulders coming into play, caused by a fall. And so certainly there's a lot of work being done at heights in the construction industry. And I think that is one of the driving factors of why it remains so highly ranked every year in the OSHA list of annual citations. Secondly, it's because of the fact that workers take it for granted that they can operate safely at height. So it's routine. And with routine comes familiarity and comfort from the worker. So he or she is probably less inclined to understand the true risk. And that's where training and education and communication can help bridge the gap between the reality and the risk.
It does sound like there's a "it's not going to happen to me" kind of attitude among some workers, or it hasn't happened so far.
Correct. But I bet they can all cite somebody to whom it has happened and someone that they know, perhaps last week, last month, 2 years ago. There's certainly enough occurrences that they can certainly relate to the risk. But making that connection between the risk and when it might occur to me, that's an emotional and an intellectual gap that needs to be communicated, needs to first be understood and then communicated so that it can be closed.
Let's turn to scaffolds for a minute. Now, the danger with scaffolds is not only in how they're used, but how they're erected. Is there an awareness of that in the industry?
There is, of course. It goes kind of hand in hand with the falls issue, right? Certainly scaffolds is something you can envision, and certainly that presents risk. An entirely different set of risk with a traditional fall from a ladder height, then it's the manufacturer of the ladder that will help protect the worker. In the case of the scaffold, it's a little bit more complicated and elaborate of a construction of a scaffold. For this very reason, there are standards governing scaffolding, their construct, their use, and how workers have to operate within the confines of that scaffold. For example, being tied off, being limited on where to travel, with what to travel, while they're engaged in a scaffolding environment. So in the local area here, and we'll see this throughout the country, there are some jurisdictions that have taken an extra step to make the rules and regulations governing scaffolding very specific and very strict, because now the risk and the hazard has elevated, pardon the pun, by simply their use. And with that enhanced risk, unfortunately, becomes the enhanced likelihood of an occurrence. And so that risk begets a special type of training, one that we provide through our organization on a regular basis.
And of course, tougher standards only work if they're being complied with. So
True. And you know, we're humans, and so we are prone to error on occasion. And so long as we are humans and prone to error, there will be risks. The construction industry, as we are very well aware, is the riskiest of industries in which to be involved. So all the more reason to communicate and fully explain the high range and the wide range of risks that are out there.
now you mentioned training a moment ago. Employees who are involved with the construction and maintenance of power transmission and distribution systems are potentially exposed to electrical hazards. So what kind of training can help keep them safe?
Well, similar, the standard will be different, but there are standards. And so first we go to what those standards are, and those are specific, they're published. Now they're published in a book that's very thick, about an inch and a half thick. And quite frankly, the book is several hundred pages long with not a lot of pictures. So it's not an easy read by any stretch. But it is one of those publications that we reference throughout our training. And we try not to overwhelm our audience with the depth of that standards book, but we try and identify the sections that are specific to their industry. So in the case of electrical hazards, there is a specific sections, plural, that deal with the electrical industry and the hazards that are incumbent upon the workers there. We target the training to the industry where it will be most relevant. And so by keeping folks aware of the NFPA 70E, which is the electrical standard in this country, and the changes, the ever changes, the annual changes, it appears, to that standard, that's part and parcel of the message that we want to get out to the contractors, and most importantly to their employees, I should say, to their employees.
Let's talk about struck by hazards for a minute. They are an ever-present danger at work sites where people have to work in close proximity to vehicles, either construction industry vehicles or non-construction industry vehicles, maybe motorists passing by. How can that danger be mitigated?
Well, it would be nice if we could train everybody, because it isn't always the workers who are putting themselves in precarious situations. The general public, as you just noted, is part of the equation for solving that, especially when it comes to laborers and flaggers and roadside workers. They're at risk, not because of what they're doing, but because of others who are entering near their workspace and putting them at risk. So the general public awareness needs to be increased, and that will help protect those who serve the public, but also at a high degree of risk. The struck by issue is certainly in a high priority in the industry, what we call general industry, so non-construction specific. It is still a risk in a construction setting because you have moving parts, you've got four-wheeled vehicles, very common on a construction site. But even in a general industry, a warehouse, a retail store, you've got oftentimes moving objects, and they present a risk there. It's one of the reasons that OSHA has identified the struck by risk as one of the four most common citations and the four most common risks incurred by people in the workplace setting, not just construction, not just outdoors, but certainly many indoor settings incur that risk of being struck by or caught between a moving object or a stationary object with a moving object causing that situation. So preventable, yes, and certainly a much wider application and scope.
Now, we've come a long way with our understanding of ergonomics. Has that understanding made its way into the construction industry?
It does, certainly. We do programs all the time on lifting, and you know, the construction worker is oh so dependent on his or her physical capabilities as well as mental capabilities, but certainly the physical capabilities are paramount to being able to perform his or her work. And so we want to make sure that whenever they're engaged in a level of physical activity, that they're doing so in a ergonomically safe manner. And the most common type of injury we're seeing in that regard is one related to lifting heavy objects, moving heavy objects, doing so in a manner that preserves your muscles, your joints, limits the amount of pain and strain and stress on the body. Those musculoskeletal stressors, they add up over time. And in a career, they add up over decades. And after decades worth of work, the body will let you know that it's had enough. And so if we can engage safely in lifting and moving and manipulating with our hands and our shoulders and our elbows and our knees and our ankles, we can preserve people's careers for a long time.
And what is your take on the general readiness to render first aid in the event of an injury or a cardiac arrest on a construction site?
Yeah, that is becoming more and more a requirement. In fact, it's almost mainstream. So I don't know that I can say more and more. It has become a mainstream requirement that first aid, CPR, and now AED trained personnel are on every job site. Your general contractors are requiring it of their subs. And just when somebody thinks that that's not my job, there will be that day, well, it might become your job, if even for a few minutes. And as we all know, those minutes can save lives before the EMS personnel who are professionals in this can extend more elaborate, if necessary, care. So you talk about everybody needing to watch out for his or her brother on the work site. That first aid, CPR, AED training, we happen to use the American Heart Association curriculum in the programs that we teach. Very popular with us, requires recertification every few years to make sure that when one does have that certification, that he or she keeps that certification current, because you never know when it'll be your turn to lend that helping hand to a coworker.
Such a good point. Some companies have initiated zero incident goals. Is that attainable? Is it worth pursuing that?
Absolutely, it's worth it pursuing. It's a great goal. So long as, however, there is human element involved and sometimes electronic elements involved and technological elements involved, none of which are foolproof. Human or technologically, we are not perfect. So long as there's an opportunity for imperfection, then I think the risk will always be there for worksite injuries. There are higher risk industries than others. As I mentioned earlier, construction ranks at the top. So the programming and the services that we provide remain critically important to keeping that number as close to zero as we can get it.
Now, you've talked about the training and the programs, but for anyone who's not familiar with the Construction Safety Council, can you give us a brief overview of it?
Sure. We've been around for over 30 years, founded in the 1980s, only about 15 years after OSHA, for that matter. OSHA's only been around for now 50 years. And so we weren't far behind OSHA in identifying the need to protect America's workforce on construction job sites. That's our primary mission, and we've been at it for over 30 years. We haven't reached 0%, and we're going to keep working every day until we do get to 0%. There are contractors and there are workers who are at risk But by getting them trained, by getting them knowledgeable, by keeping them current on that standards book, which isn't getting any thinner, as we hear from OSHA, as long as they keep issuing new guidance, I'd like more words to replace existing words and to have new words in that manual. But certainly there's a little bit of a give and take in that process, because the more complicated the construction industry gets, so too must the standards evolve to keep up to date. And so long as the standards change and the work still needs to be done, which is all a positive thing. If there's work to be done, that means as a society and as a community and as a country, we're moving forward. Then we're going to be here to provide that training to ensure that everybody goes home safe.
Sounds like a great note to end on, unless you have something you'd like to add. Anything I
We
missed?
enjoy our mission. We're proud of our mission, and we're glad to continue it. And thanks for helping us tell our story.
All right. Thank you. I've been talking to Bob Lahey, President and CEO of the Construction Safety Council. And the Construction Safety Council's website is easy, buildsafe.org. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.